Hola, buenos días. Bienvenidos a todas y a todos. Vamos a comenzar, vamos a tratar de ser bien justos con el tiempo, porque sabemos que hay muchas personas que están, eh, que tienen el tiempo limitado y quiero hacerle justicia al esfuerzo de haber llegado a tiempo a esta actividad. Estoy bien contenta de ver tanta gente. eh, Tantos bibliotecarios que a fin de cuentas son nuestros ayudantes principales en nuestros procesos de investigación. Mi nombre es Nadja Ríos, pertenezco a la Facultad de Estudios Generales, el Departamento de Inglés. Quiero destacar la presencia del decano Aurelio García Archilla y de la decana Agnes Bosch, así como la directora del Sistema de Bibliotecas y el director de Ciencias de la Información. Gracias por estar aquí. También a mis colegas profesores que también han sacado su tiempo, colegas del recinto universitario de Mayagüez, Hilda Teresa, siempre gracias por ese apoyo, ¿verdad? Y estas dos colegas nuevas que se unen. El proyecto Diáspora, que es el proyecto que codirijo junto a Mirelsa González, decana de la Facultad también de Humanidades, es una investigación que intenta documentar los flujos migratorios entre Puerto Rico y las Islas Vírgenes Americanas. Cuenta con dos investigadoras principales, Mirelsa y esta servidora, y recibimos el apoyo de colegas de varios recintos, departamentos, entre ellos el Departamento de Música, Ciencias de la Información y Ciencias de Cómputo, porque se integra este semestre el doctor Carlos Corrada. Además, quiero destacar el trabajo de nuestras ayudantes de investigación, Fabiola Martínez y Gabriela Rivera, que son las hormiguitas detrás de todo este trabajo. Esta actividad es posible gracias al Decanato de Estudios Graduados y de Investigación, pero sobre todo gracias a todas las secretarias, oficiales administrativos y personal del CRED que nos dan la mano para hacer estos eventos posibles. Gracias por darse cita aquí hoy. Los invito a que nos sigan en Facebook. Tenemos una paginita que los pueden conseguir a través de Diaspora Project, y también publicamos en las redes sociales bajo el hashtag El futuro del pasado es digital. Quiero invitar al decano de la Facultad de Estudios Generales para que les dé un saludo y luego paso a presentar a nuestra invitada.
Quiero darle la bienvenida a todos los distinguidos visitantes, empezando por nuestra conferencista y la decana Bosch, la directora del sistema de bibliotecas, todos los docentes que vienen a participar, los no docentes y los estudiantes. Esto es un área pues importantísima para nuestro desarrollo como gente que trabaja en la academia y en la educación, que tenemos que desarrollar continuamente. Es una alegría que la iniciativa haya salido de aquí de esta facultad y esperamos que todos pues lo disfruten intensamente. I want to greet you on behalf of the College of General Studies. We are very happy you're here. This is a very important theme for us, and I'll be listening for you for as long as I can. Thank you.
Dr. Jennifer Giuliano holds a Bachelor of Arts in English and History from Miami University, a Master of Arts in History from Miami University, and a Master of Arts in American History from the University of Illinois, before completing her PhD in History at the University of Illinois in 2010. She currently holds a position as an Associate Professor in the Department of History and affiliated faculty in both Native American Studies and American Studies at the Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis. Tengo que respirar. I met Jennifer in 2003 when she first came to our campus as a guest speaker for INAS. During her first visit, I learned the basics of digital humanities. Her talk opened many possibilities to rethink my academic work, and after 6 years, we are still collaborating. She has guided us as a mentor and as a primary consultant in the Caribbean Diaspora Project a digital humanities initiative that I co-direct with Mirza Gonzalez and that is funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Puerto Rican Endowment for the Humanities. This project is devoted to preserving primary and secondary materials about human mobility in the Caribbean region. Please welcome Jennifer Giuliano.
Thanks for taking your time out of your day on a Wednesday to come see me. As Nadia and Mirza have been so welcoming to me, this has been a project that's been 6 years in the making with them, and I was telling both of them this week that when I first came, we were still in the process of figuring out, like, what is the digital? Like, what is that digital thing? And 6 years later, we're sitting in a room having a conversation, very, very fluent conversation about metadata and technologies and decisions. So for me, this talk is really an opportunity to sort of congratulate them on how far they've come, that I get to come back and talk about preservation and access and collaboration. So what I'm going to do for you today is give you a talk that is sort of uniting a couple of different things. I'm going to do some definitional work about what digital humanities is, what preservation is, what access is, and then I'm actually going to walk you through sets of projects from the Caribbean that are sort of taking on those notions for themselves and talk a little bit about the technologies they've chosen, their preservation and access strategies, and how they work as collaboration. So it's really sort of a talk that's designed to sort of illustrate what's possible in the Caribbean with the resources on the ground. So when I start my talk, I want to start with the black box. When we think about digital humanities, most often it's sort of this weird black box that we know something's in it, that it exists, but we don't really know sort of how to sort of define it for others. So inevitably, my family always asks, what is that thing? And I give them this sort of odd, weird answer where, well, it's computers, but it's humanities, but it's social sciences, but it's art, but it's also critical thinking and all of these other things. Or I give them this answer. It is human beings interacting with bits and bytes in some sort of obscure way. And my family giggles at this picture every time. And my nephew and nieces always want to know if that's me, like the shadow in the picture, which I don't know if that means they think I've lost weight or changed genders, or I'm not really sure. So when I start talking about digital humanities, what I talk about is that digital humanities brings computational methods and publishing to bear on the traditional humanities disciplines. And I talk about it as critical thinking and critical discourse. So it is synthesizing, analyzing, and critiquing. So it's all the things we learn to do, like writing a 5-paragraph essay or writing an article, but we're doing those through digital methods and digital means. And so the illustration I always give my students when I start talking about what digital humanities is in the introductory course is this sort of spectrum, a timeline that sort of is open and runs. And on the left-hand side of the timeline, you have engaging with digital tools and methods. And for me, that's sort of a very simple thing, right? It's blogs, it's podcasts, it's putting something up on the internet for other people to see, to read, to engage with. This is a relatively simple sort of synthesis process, right? It is, I sit down, I type some things, I have some things to say. My colleagues who specialize in social media tend to live at the end of this spectrum. It's Twitter, it's Instagram, it's Tumblr, it's Facebook, it is also WordPress and Drupal and HTML and CSS, where the goal is really just to provide material to other people as consumers. So that's sort of the light end of the spectrum, and that's the spectrum where I spend a lot of my time with students and with K through 12 kids in particular. Let's take their ideas, let's think about them through a critical framework, and let's use the tools that already exist to put those out there to engage with their audience. In the middle of the spectrum is customization. Customization is basically using someone else's tools that already exist to make them your own. Omeka, for example, is one such tool that's common in the digital humanities. Omeka is a digital exhibit tool that's designed for you to basically put images and video and photographs and textual documents up on the internet. You basically create them as links to one another to tell a story about your exhibit topic, right? So some of the famous Omeka projects are on the Bracero Archive, the Bracero movement. There's others on landmarks, there's ones on the national parks. They sort of proliferate I think there's something like 120,000 Omeka digital exhibits currently living on the internet. You also have tools like Scalar. Scalar is a little bit more complicated. Scalar is a tool that was created by the people who were doing the future of the book, and they were interested in the fact that the internet has all of these digital things out there. How do we tell stories with those digital things that never exist on paper? And so Scalar and Omeka are just two options of things that basically you use someone else's tool, but you make it your own through the way you design the story, through the color choices, the font choices. It requires you thinking creatively about how you discuss and critique and engage with your audience. The vast majority of digital humanists, like 80% or so, I would say, are in the sort of engaging and customizing end of the spectrum. They're basically using tools and things that other people have, and they're doing some light technical work to make them their own. The high end of the digital humanities is developing your own. And this is what I like to call the gateway drug for most people. They see really extravagant, beautiful projects that do really dynamic and interesting things, and they think, I want that. And then they realize that that requires somebody to write custom code and custom algorithms and custom behaviors, and that's way beyond them. So when I define digital humanities, what I like to say to people is, you can locate yourself anywhere on the spectrum, and you are part of digital humanities. But when you locate yourself, you then become responsible to the standards in the community that are at that point on the spectrum with you. So for example, if I was mapping, I could use a Google map to simply put some markers on a map and publish the Google map. My role there is to use the Google standards to make sure everything gets located in the right place. Or I could use story maps in the middle, which is a mapping technology from Esri. And in that case, I have to build a logo and build a story and build relationships. And there's all kinds of rules about what I can and can't do to tell my story. Those two actions are very different than me building my own geographic information system map, right? Where I've built all my own custom maps, and you can zoom, and you can spin, and you can dissolve, and you can go all kinds of places, right? Each of those places on the spectrum comes with a community that you have to talk to. So oftentimes when I talk about this spectrum, what I like to say to people is, pick some place on the spectrum that you feel comfortable technically, and start there. And then over time, you'll slowly move your way along the spectrum to become more and more technically proficient. So what does this mean for preservation and access? When we think about preservation, we have to think about preservation digitally in a couple of different ways. The most simple definition of preservation is that you give continued access to that thing that is digital ad infinitum, forever and always. The problem with that is, when we talk about digital preservation, it is a new field. So even though the internet's been around since the 50s and it's been public since the 70s, people are just now trying to figure out, what does it cost to save a digital byte of information in 100 years? How many times does somebody have to look at it? How many times does it have to be transformed? How many times does it have to be touched? Digital preservationists are trying to figure out the answer to this. So when I talk about digital preservation, I talk about digital preservation along 4 different sorts of definitions. Digital objects are themselves physical. They exist in a server, a piece of hardware that has to be maintained and given access to. So this is contrary to what everybody tells the public, right? You say, just put it in the cloud, right? As if the cloud is literally the ether around you. The cloud is not ether. It's not, I swear. The cloud is actually cables and giant warehouses all around the globe that connect to one another. And when one of those warehouses fails, that's why the internet goes down. So when we think about digital preservation, it's not just thinking about, I've put it in the cloud, it will be available forever. It's, did I back up that thing that's in the cloud to a couple of different types of formats and hardwares? And the rule of thumb is 3. 1 in physical, one in a cloud in your own country or your own space, and one in another country or another server space. What this means is, unfortunately, for many of us, preservation really is just like, I've stuck it in the cloud and hope that when I come back to it, it's there later. Or if you're mother, it's sending me thumb drives of things with no labels, and I'm supposed to guess what to do with this thing. It's also about encoding them in a way that people can understand. So when you create a digital object, it comes with information about that object. And one of the things digital preservation is designed to do is to tell people what is the bare minimum amount of information you need to know about something. So when you go to save a document on your hard drive, you're telling it specific information that is associated with that digital piece of information. So for example, the title, the author, the format, right? So Jennifer Giuliano, presentation title, docx. Those become pieces of information that are essential to someone 15 or 20 years in the future to know what program to use to open that piece of information in. So how many of you guys have ever tried to open a file on your computer that you created years and years and years ago, and it opens up and you get the weird characters and the letters and the like things? That's a digital preservation problem, which is the software is too advanced for the digital piece of information that was saved. So to get that piece of information back, you have to go find the program that you used to create it to reopen it. That's a pretty big challenge, especially for those of us who are getting older and created documents in their fond, youthful days of 17 and 18, who might still want access to those things now. The third point about digital preservation that is, I think, the most important point, particularly for you guys, is that digital objects and digital preservation is about things that human beings can understand. If it only exists on a drive and no one ever looks at it, does it really have meaning? Does it matter to your community? Does it matter to who you are? And so a lot of times when people say they want to get into digital preservation, they'll say, I'm going to save every copy of every single thing that we're doing. Well, that's great. You can do that because it's not that expensive. But in 50 years, when you come back to that document or that set of things, how do you know which one is the one you want to be using? And so part of digital preservation is actually asking the question, which version of things should I save for the future? And importantly, they're interrelated objects. So if you did a quick count on your cell phone, for example, you probably have a couple hundred images, a couple hundred videos. Part of digital preservation is thinking about the relationship of those things to who you are as a person. So if you spent a day writing down every time you used a digital device or a digital object, you'd likely find that not only do you have your cell phone and your computer, you also have things like an ATM, and you have the parking entrance, and you have the Fitbit on your hand. Part of digital preservation is trying to figure out, if we wanted to remake your life in 24 hours, what were all the digital things you touched and dealt with that we would need to have access to show people who your life is or what your life is? So when I get started with my students, I give them two simple questions. How will this thing be available in 50 or 100 years? And how will users experience it authentically in relationship to what the creator or the author wanted? And those two really simple questions have incredibly complex answers. So if I said to you, what would you want people to know about you in 50 years, what would the answer be? Is it your family photos? Is it your baptismal records and your marriage records? Is it the editorial you wrote for a newspaper? Is it your ATM receipts, right? It's not quite as simple as it sounds to say, we're trying to preserve the cultural record. And unfortunately for you guys, in the aftermath of the hurricanes and other things, preservation is even more important now than it was in the past, because you lose, with environmental climate change, access to cultural heritage very, very quickly. So for the librarians in the room who care and want to know what digital preservation does, there are sort of four components to digital preservation. The first one is about standards. Did you follow the standards? The right file type, the right metadata, what is the information we use to locate this? The second criteria is about selection. What do we preserve and why? A lot of times when I start with this type of project with people, they say, I'm going to save everything, or I'm only going to save one thing. Well, if you only save one thing, what happens if that file goes bad, or you lose the copy, or you lose the object? So one is probably not a very good answer, but neither is a million, because how are you going to find and locate the things you need in a million? You also want to think about protection, and this is a conversation that I have a lot with people. I work in indigenous data in particular, so I work with tribal communities and tribal scholars who are thinking about roles and rights and permission. So certain clans can have access to certain pieces of information at certain times of the year, or you might decide that only people who have a particular cultural role, so only religious figures or only political figures can have access to certain types of information about the community. Part of the question of digital preservation is about where it is and who has access to it. Who can use it and why? Why can they use it? The example that I gave a few weeks ago in Ottawa, I was showing some images of some beadwork patterns and was asked by someone in the audience, well, I don't understand why it matters that there are these things on the internet that other people can remix and reuse. And then I showed them an image of how that beadwork had been lifted by a white woman from the American South, who then turned it into a business and was selling Cherokee beadwork as her own. The ethics of that are a little problematic, to say the least, but also when we get into things like sacred rituals and sacred images, those things being available on the internet do real harm and trauma to communities. And that's part of what you want to think about when you think about preservation. How do we do the least amount of harm to people in the future with what we're doing today? And of course, how do we open it and get to it in X number of years? Preservation ties to access, this question of who gets access, who gets to use it, how and why, with the question of users. Can whatever you're doing digitally be used by your intended audience? So a lot of times when I start talking about preservation and access to people, the first thing they say is, well, I put it on the internet and that's access. The problem with that is you're assuming the internet and your computer is how people engage with your digital project or your digital asset. And that's not always true. How many of you guys, the first thing you do is pick up your cell phone to use it rather than your computer? Yep. What if the site has been built or the digital object's been built not for cell phone screens, but for computer screens or one of these big giant screens? Part of access is recognizing that people come to your project and your technology with different hardwares and softwares that it has to be responsive to. And in particular, the example that I like to give people a lot of times, they'll build a digital project and they'll say, we want to do some user testing. And so they'll go out and they'll get people from their university to come in and to sit down at terminals and play with their computer. And the first thing I ask them is, well, did you bring in someone who is blind, low vision, or disabled? Did you bring in somebody with a logic disability to test your site? And they'll say, well, no, why would I do that? And the answer to that is, when we think about access, most often people think about someone like themselves using their digital project or their digital asset, right? So I appear to have sight, I appear to hear, I appear to have no disabilities, I appear to have no logic processings. So I design and build things as if everyone who comes to my project can do all the things I can do. And the reality is, 29.2 million Americans are in a state of disability at any given moment and are not coming to your project being able to see, to hear, to process logically the same way you are. So part of it's a question about unintended users. If I built something for faculty, the language is specific to faculty, right? Like all those hoity-toity $5 words like discourse and metamorphosis and all the words that I don't like using. All of those words are great if you assume an educational level for someone. But what if users of your digital project or your digital asset have a 4th grade education? What if English is not their first language? What if the internet is completely new to them? Are you assuming someone's knowledge that they need to have to access your project or access your digital resource? And this is what we call tacit knowledge, right? We build systems assuming tacit knowledge about who our users are and what they can do. The reality is, tacit knowledge is a privilege, right? It's a system that relies on privilege of the users. So a lot of times when somebody says to me, I'm working on access standards, They're going to tell me about the font they use. They're going to tell me about the pretty colors they've chosen. They're going to tell me about the fact that it's available online 24/7 from Google or whoever. And I will say, that's really great. I'd like to now drop you someplace that doesn't have electricity. How does somebody use your project? Or I'm going to drop you someplace that cell phones are the way most people access projects. So I have a bunch of colleagues who work in preservation and access in Africa. And the primary means of getting on the internet in Africa is a $5 cell phone with very limited bandwidth, which means all of those fancy digital projects with lots of images and photos and behaviors where things turn on and flash and move dynamically, those take forever to load on a cell phone. Does it assume specific hardware, software, bandwidth? Does it assume particular backgrounds? Does it assume certain rights of use and reuse? When I talk to students about this, how many of you guys read the terms of use when you sign up for a service? Yeah. Do you know when you sign up for Google, for example, you sign away rights to every single thing you do with a Google platform? Google has the right to read your email, to use your photos, to follow you on the internet as you do things. They record your IP address and your behavior. One of the best examples of this is that there was a mother in the United States from Georgia who was sharing with her family great photos of her kid. She just had a baby, her first kid, and as all new mothers do, we take photos of things and we share them to everyone, thinking everyone is interested in our cute but ugly baby. And she shared a bunch of photos with her family members on Google and Facebook. And then about a year and a half later, someone texted her and said, "Isn't this a photo of your child?" And they were using it in advertisements online and overseas. She found out her child was now the Gerber baby of Facebook and Google, right? The face that everybody knows. This is why when we talk about preservation and access, part of what we're talking about is, what are you asking people to do legally that they need to know about? And there's a reason why terms of use are so big, which is most companies think, what about terms of use? If it's really, really long, nobody's ever gonna read it and know about it. And my favorite example of this is, I have a colleague, Kevin Krause, who's an American historian, and he does a terms of use for his class. And buried in the terms of use, it says, if you read this sentence and you email me by this date, you get an A. And he's had one student read the terms of use and come back to him, right? Fabulous. And this is part of the reason why when we talk about access, we need to talk about who we're really serving. Terms of use protect companies and businesses. Simple bullet points of use protect the human beings who are invested and who care. And that's what I mean about reflecting power structures. Does it reflect particular power structures? Not only does it require lots of privilege to, own a device and do these things, but are you asking for very specific things from the human beings who are engaging with your digital assets and your projects, right? So signing away rights to things or asking them to do work and labor for things, those things are ways of expressing power in relationships that not a lot of people talk about. And I work on decolonialism in particular, and the question always is, are you hurting other people with what you're doing digitally? So not just simple things like, are you trolling someone, are you saying bad things on the internet, but does releasing a particular photo cause a problem for a family? Releasing photos of bodies, releasing photos of grave goods, showing images of war, of violence, of climate change deaths, those things. Those are questions you have to ask as you think about the digital. It's not just sort of today, it's sort of who you're impacting tomorrow. So those are definitions. Are there questions about any of those definitions before I slide to showing you different projects that operate with those definitions? And it's okay, you can hold them till later, and we're gonna do question and answer in Spanish and English so that if you're nervous about asking a question, don't be. Okay. So we're going to start with digital libraries. So a digital library has a very official, formal definition. It is run by librarians, for librarians, based on library standards, right? Everybody giggles, but digital libraries, so one of the mistakes a lot of people make in digital humanities is they assume librarians are not researchers or do not have their own disciplinary culture. That's not true at all. And the best way we learn about this is through digital library infrastructures. So digital library infrastructures are things that use metadata standards and information standards and standards about how you store things physically and virtually. And it's basically sort of an 800-pound gorilla to make sure that in 100 years, people have access to data and information that's been created in the cultural record. And so I'm going to give you some examples of digital library projects that are digital humanities in the Caribbean. So the first one is, this is the Early Caribbean Digital Archive. This project started in 2011. The Early Caribbean Society got together, and we'll make all these slides and URLs available to you guys. They got together at this meeting. It was international, from scholars all around the Caribbean, came together in the United States to talk about what is this digital thing, and how do we as Caribbeanists, care about what we're doing. And what they decided is that one of the biggest challenges for scholars working in the Caribbean was the fact that documents had been taken from the Caribbean to colonial centers and not repatriated, not given back. And so the Early Caribbean Digital Archive basically made its mission to go to all of the colonial countries to find all of the documents from the early period of colonization and digitize them so that they were available to scholars on the ground here in the Caribbean. That's a pretty cool project. So they have documents in German and French and Spanish and English, all kinds of really great documents. What it sort of marks for us as thinking about preservation and access is that for them, and this is a project from Northeastern, their goal was not necessarily to bolster their own scholarship and their own community and their own research. Like, white American academics from a rich private institution like Northeastern have money to go to those places. They wanted to serve the students and the scholars here on the ground in the Caribbean who weren't going to be able to afford to go to spend 6 months in Spain or Denmark or wherever. And so basically what they did was they digitized all of these things using a nice little service called the Digital Library of the Caribbean, DLOC. DLOC is the best people you could ever work with in the world. They're headquartered in Florida, and they have a state mission to do digitization throughout the Caribbean for anything anyone wants digitized and stored in a library. It's fabulous. So what Elizabeth and her team, this is Elizabeth Dillon's project, did, is they basically built a little WordPress plugin that goes to DLOC where they've digitized all the documents, and it calls those documents out and displays them in a WordPress front end. And they have 3 components to their project. They have the archive, so this is the DLOC archive that is specific to the project. You can view everything, you can download the documents, you can download the metadata, you can play around with browsing and searching. They then, on top of this, have built classroom lessons as part of their project. So they said, what in this archive are things we could be using in our classrooms? So they've done it for literature classes, linguistics classes, English as a second language classes. They've built sort of miniature curated syllabi that any faculty member can do in their classroom. So you just borrow the syllabus, you borrow the images, you take it to your classroom in Indiana, for example, and you have a lesson plan ready to go with outcomes, which is a really great service, right? They also have some exhibits. So they use a particular tool that allows them to build topical exhibits. This is one that they've done on natural history. So what you're seeing is in the center, you have a description of what the exhibit is. So this is about flora, fauna, and landscapes, and the sort of material images of them that show up in the archive. And then on the right-hand side, they basically have sort of a step-by-step walkthrough to introduce somebody to flora and fauna using the documents from DLOC. And this is a really smart way to think about preserving and providing access to your project, which is it's not just sort of meeting those metadata standards and those library standards, it's that we're layering on faculty and students who care about using those objects in their classroom, but also a little bit of tourists who go someplace and want to learn about like flora and fauna. I don't know how many of you guys are birders, like birding people. The birders are like good at this. And they love these types of projects because knowing historically what things looked like, how they differ now, sort of a really big thing. A second project, for those of you who are interested in music, that can serve as a digital library's sort of architecture. This was built at Duke University by Laurent Dubois and Dave Garner and Mary Kate Lingold. This is a project that is about interpreting a single piece of music that was preserved and digitized from a 1707 voyage to Jamaica, Barbados, Nieves, and St. Christopher's. And basically what they did is they went out and they identified this one piece of music that they felt like was culturally significant to people today. They digitized, so that's the background image that you can see, they digitized the piece of music. And they've gone through and they've basically, every single red item you've seen, when you click on it, you get a definition, but you also get a sound file that comes with it. So so I clicked Angola, I get the voice and fretless banjo, so I get a banjo playing that section of the music. I also get a choral arrangement, so if somebody wanted to sing that portion of the music, and I get a musicologist's definition of that music. Part of what's really cool with this project, by the way, another way to think about access, once they built this project, they went to a conference here in the Caribbean and they invited very famous performers to come play the music, and they recorded it, and it's available on YouTube. And what they learned as scholars when they did this was the way they'd imagined and sort of had their students who performed the music for the site do the work was not at all how Caribbean musicians performed it themselves. And those musicians were able to tap into their cultural heritage, tap into their history, tap into their family, and their performance, I mean, I kid you not, light years apart, right? This was sort of very perfunctory and musical, and I followed the notes. This was about living cultural music for that community. And again, this is a single document that's been digitized, that's in a digital library at Duke. They basically call out that document, and it's served up in this front end, in a WordPress front end, with some audio files and some visual files. One document turned into this. So when we think about digital library architecture for digital humanities, part of the suggestion I make to you guys is where it's very useful is it has the ability to scale from one document to hundreds, to thousands, to millions. And because it all uses the same standards and the same access principles in terms of like how you get the item from the collection to you and back, it makes it really easy to build your projects larger and larger and larger, or to build many projects in parallel to one another. So this is the conversation I've been having here on the ground in Puerto Rico. There's a project on Carnival that's running. They're talking about other projects, and all of them use that DLOC repository as the base. So once we figure out how to get one document out, any project can use that same process to get what they would like out of the repository. Questions about digital library infrastructure? Super cool. It's really useful, and importantly, DLOC is free for anyone to use. You today could sign up for a DLOC account and begin digitizing and having things available. Okay. Internet Archive, yeah. Yeah. It's dloc.org, D-L-O-C, and I'll share with you guys all these URLs at the end so that you can have access to those. They're fabulous. Yeah.
So Jennifer, we have a partnership, meaning the UPR system, we have a partnership with DLOC. So if you're interested, you don't have to pay because our institution is already paying that membership in order for them to give us technical support and assistance.
Yeah. Including they gave scanners, like they dropped scanners on the ground here for you guys. And that's where the benefit of an institutional partnership like a library is, right? These are professionals who know what to do and how to do it, and they can tell you what's the right way and what's the wrong way. And more importantly, in the case of DLOC, they let you make the decisions about what metadata means and how you keep it and what you play with for it. So I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with the Internet Archive. The Internet Archive is headquartered in California, Silicon Valley, San Francisco. The Internet Archive is started in the late 80s and early 90s as a project from this very eccentric and interesting man named Brewster Colley, who's won a bunch of awards for this work. He was sitting around with a bunch of friends, and said, what do we do with all the things that are on the internet? Like, how do we know that they're going to still be around in 10 years? Like, what happens when a website goes away? How do we get it back? So the Internet Archive has built basically its own digital library, and attached to that digital library is something called the Wayback Machine. And the Wayback Machine allows you to register a URL, and they then search that URL using a little bot, and it takes basically a snapshot of your website all the time. What they also do with that is they actually will allow you to crawl and harness your digital library collection in the Internet Archive. So this is a project that's run out of the University of Maryland. I've talked about this a few times with some people here on the ground. This is a project where the University of Maryland has this very large collection of French language pamphlets, and they wanted to do something with them because the faculty on campus needed material, primary source material to use in their classes to teach students the French language and French culture and history. So my colleague, Kelsey Corlett-Rivera, and I got together and basically talked about how to turn these digital assets into something that would not only be preserved and available for the future and anyone who wanted to use them, but would come with things that students could easily sort of use and understand and access. So the process works like this. They have a workflow in the library where they identify the pamphlet they want digitized, they digitize it, and they deposit it in the Internet Archive, which is this nice, pretty picture. This is the Internet Archive showing you the book that's been digitized, the pamphlet that's been digitized. They then pass that digitized object on to students who translate from French into English. And the students get credit and citation for that as part of their coursework. Every pamphlet they generate, every pamphlet they translate, they get citation credit. It then comes back to the Colony in Crisis team, and graduate students and undergraduate students do research on the individual pamphlets to tell stories about what happened. So this was version 1. They did the first issue was on the grain crisis in 1789. They have a group of scholars who basically are arguing that the grain crisis wasn't a thing, it didn't really exist. And so the pamphlets are designed to teach that to students. The project does that. They're now in their 4th issue, and that's the one I'm showing you now. They've launched a Creole project, which is incredible. So 2 different scholars at Montclair State University, in conjunction with Haitian Creoles on the ground in Haiti, selected pamphlets and built their own edition on Creole for white students, basically, because it's Maryland, white students in the United States. So that when somebody says something is Creole, they actually know what that means and why it's culturally significant and relevant. And part of what I love about this project is, so the architecture is the Internet Archive. That front end is just WordPress. So they're literally just embedding the viewer in the WordPress page. They copy and paste from the documents that students have created into the WordPress front end. They hit publish, and the issue is live and available. So it's not really complicated technically, but it involves a lot of scholarly work and thinking. And this is what I learned a tremendous amount in this process. Translation is like super hard, right? We know that. But teaching translation is even harder. And that's part of what the project is designed to do, is to give them live primary sources that the students can see, that learning Creole is not something from the past necessarily, it's something you do constantly in a contemporary world, and that there are people around who speak this language and are of this community. So Colony in Crisis has had 4 issues, they're getting ready to do more, and importantly for us, part of the reason why this is a great DH project, they also took the time to record people speaking the language. So when everything is translated, they also do a French language audio file, a Creole audio file, and an English audio file. Because one of the best ways to learn language and culture is to actually hear it and think about it. And they've embedded those audio files in each of the documents so that you automatically get access to them. And that's the type of layering that we think about when we think about preservation and access, right? Each file has to be made available to the public, but it's only when you combine them together that someone truly gets a vision of the Creole language in this particular moment. And that's what we love about sort of what's possible with the digital, is that you can mix and remix and combine things in lots of ways. So what about the digital humanities? So if you ask my colleagues at IUPUI, they will tell you that the digital humanities is something new and fresh and interesting. I will tell you we are old and stale and have been around for a very long time. So part of what I want to highlight for you guys today are some digital humanities infrastructures that are readily accepted, that everyone uses, that are really great in terms of they don't require a lot of technical know-how. So the first one is Ramble Bahamas. So this is a project of the Oral and Public History Institute at the Harry Moore Library and campus in the Bahamas. This is called the From Dat Time project. So this is an Omeka collection. So Omeka is a digital humanities software for digital exhibits. They basically have gone out and done oral histories and digitized documents and information about rambling, which is, so there's two uses of the word. Ramble in one way is to go from here to there, but in the Bahamian context, it means to wander without purpose, which I think is a fabulous, that's the best use of the word, right? So what they've basically done is they've gone out to their own community and they've interviewed people about what it means to ramble, to wander without purpose. They've then asked people to give them photographs, images, documents, diaries. They've digitized those and they've made them available. And in particular, what they've done with this particular project uses something called CurateScape, which is a theme for WordPress that allows you to geolocate information immediately to create a virtual tour. So these are images that they have taken and things that have been digitized as part of it. You have audio files from all the oral history interviews that they've done, and each one comes with this sort of introductory text. So when you click the ramble, you get to actually choose to follow the Great Heritage Trail. You get to follow sort of different tours throughout the Bahamas. What's great about this project is there are a lot of people who are never going to get to the Bahamas. And this gives them a glimpse of the land, the architecture, and the people without them having to lose or leave their sort of space. Part of what I also love about this is that when you do this at scale, each pin becomes its own story in its own place. So for example, there are churches, there are squares, there are roadsides, that most people, when you ask them to tell their history, you're not going to get that in an official history of the Bahamas. But that is the history you're going to get when you talk to members of the community. And I think that's one of the principles of access and preservation that's really important, is you want your digital project to reflect what your community needs and wants. And that's what this project really does. It says, we know you want to talk about rambling, here's how you do it, and here's what you do. So most of the projects we've dealt with so far are about communities as audiences, right? So the access principle really is about, are you serving the people you're coming from? Are you telling stories of the people around you? This is a project of my colleague Alex Gill and Kaima Glover. Alex is a fabulous digital librarian in New York, and he and Kaima have been having some conversations about the ways in which scholars and intellectuals talk to each other. And they were really interested in this notion that information passes from scholar to scholar and intellectual to intellectual, and we don't really track and chart it. And so what they've done is they've created a really simple digital project. So on the left-hand side, you have the start of the movement that they're tracing, and it's a project called Same Boats, and they're tracing intellectuals that are part of the Caribbean sphere, primarily. So you have a timeline that runs, and you can move that blue slider up and down to delineate the timeline and who you get to see. In the center, you get to pick the intellectuals that you'd like to look at and follow. And on the right-hand side, you have color-coded connections that track when they've talked to each other. So this uses their letters. So when Amy Cesar writes a letter to Catherine Dunham, you get the endpoints of them with a line that connects. And the wider and heavier and darker the line and the connection gets, the more they're talking to each other. And that's what you see represented along the right-hand side. And part of what's really cool about this particular project is when you click on the lines and the dots, you get a little pop-up that tells you what the primary source was that tells you the connection between them, so you can go look at that primary source yourself and read that letter. This is a riff off of a really famous digital humanities project called the Enlightenment, which was done at Stanford in California. The Enlightenment's had like $1 million of funding to digitize letters from intellectuals during the French Enlightenment and to map their network and how they talk to each other. Alex and Kaima, I think, did this in like a day, sitting next to each other, deciding what they wanted. So it's a very low-scale version of the same method that's being used at a very high-end digital humanities project where they built custom technologies and custom workflows and custom everything. This is very simple. We're going to pull these people and we're going to make it visual in this specific way. And what's nice is when you pan out for Same Boats, you can do this and look at it globally. So I've highlighted the dark rings are where they definitely talk to each other. The rings that have extra circles around them are where they think people have met and talked at conferences or in exchanges. And on the right-hand side, when you click on the dots, it tells you exactly which years and which people were in that location talking to each other. That's a pretty cool thing, particularly when you're thinking about the idea of intellectual culture, right? How does freedom move around the globe? How does revolution? How does climate? How does all of these ideas that people have and talk about, how do they get passed and shared? So they're doing this with academics, right, with scholars and writers, but this would easily be something that could be adapted to follow community ideas, family, letters between soldiers. These are all things that are sort of super interesting and super easy. And Same Boats is a fabulous title. It makes me quite happy. So the final little thing I wanted to talk about with preservation and access is institutions themselves as the backbone of projects. This is Kerosene Land. Kerosene Land is a digital project designed to explore how Caribbean people have navigated social, environmental, economic changes as a relation to climate challenges and disaster. This is a project that was put together by a digital humanities center in the Caribbean. It is the only official digital humanities center in the Caribbean at this point. It's called Create Caribbean, and it's Schuyler Espiritu Center. And Schuyler basically has a one-room building outside of her town where people come in and they digitize and they talk about what's possible with digital projects. And one of the conversations that Schuyler and her group of people in her community had was all the ways in which the environment is hurting their community and their culture. And so they created Kerosene Land, which is its own sort of intellectual thread in the project, to actually chart all of those things. So when you click on an individual country, you get a set of resources related to climate change and scholarly pieces and bibliography. And some, when you click them, you get audio of people talking, you get video of people saying how climate has affected them personally. This is a really good example of how an institutional sort of home can create new projects very easily, right? So Create Caribbean has, I think it's like 6 or 7 or 8 different initiatives, and this is one of them. But what it allows them to do is sort of operate at scale in a very quick way. Oops, wrong way. So what do I mean about operating at scale? This is a horrible diagram, unsurprisingly. When we talk about preservation and access, a lot of times we start from a project-centered point of view. So we start at the top of the chart, and what we're concerned about is how do we present the information we care about? So these are the proliferation of Omeka, this is lots of websites, this are Tumblrs, you can't fall over without hitting somebody who's done a digital project of something in some way, shape, or form. Those projects are really great for their individual abilities, but it's not until you begin to try and multiply those projects or have them over a sustained period of time that you begin having to think about the underlying logic and rationale of how your project lives and remains accessible. And that's where data comes in. So I've talked to you a little bit about digital library infrastructure and internet archive infrastructure. A lot of times when I approach digital humanities and somebody says, I want to create something pretty on the internet, the conversation I bring them back to first is, what is your data, where is it going to be stored, and how is it going to live in the future? As we work through those thinkings and through those things, the first challenge that comes up is about people. I don't know how to do something. I need someone who can help me do X. I want someone who can tell me the best way to write this proposal, or how to manage the money, or how to make this blue thing turn green. I mean, literally, that's a lot of times the conversation. That's where institutional infrastructure comes into play. And that's why institutional infrastructure matters here in Puerto Rico. Having DLOC, having a center here in Puerto Rico, would allow you to actually have people dedicated to the things you need to do digitization, to do digital projects, to do infrastructure that could stay here in Puerto Rico. So when we think about preservation and access and collaboration, part of what I'm suggesting to you is you need to have all three working. You can have great digital projects, don't get me wrong, but then it's on you to make sure they are sustained and they live and they are still accessible in 5 years, which is why a lot of people end up spending their time rebuilding the same project over and over and over again. Instead, what we suggest to people, what I suggest to people, and people like Alex and others suggest, if you build on an architecture of a digital library or the Internet Archive or your own institution, then it's not as big of a deal if you have to rebuild or you want to do something different, because there are people who are knowledgeable around you who can help you. So when I talk about preservation and access, the unsexy side of the conversation is about metadata and standards and processes and workflows. The sexy side of the conversation is about collaboration. And that's the conversation you guys have going on your campus. Who do you want to work with? Do they share your same values? And does the project you produce represent those values to the communities you want to talk to? And if you can answer those three questions, those three core questions, and plan for something someone can use in 10 years, you will be a successful digital humanities project and a successful digital humanist and a successful digital humanities center. Because most people don't think about those things until after their project is over and they have to rebuild it or think about it anew. All right, I'm a little over my time. Are there questions? We're going to do them in English and Spanish. I think that Mirza is going to translate as needed. I'm happy to answer questions about anything I've said today, but also if there are general questions about anything digital humanities related or like projects you've seen, I may or may not know about it and can answer those questions as well.
Questions?
Where can I get more information about digital humanities? I plan to do my master's in science information and trying to do that with art and preservation of art.
Yeah, so there's a really great digital art history, digital humanities group in England that does all kinds of really cool stuff with like 3D visualization and imaging and preservation and all of that stuff. If you Google King's College London, digital art, digital humanities, you will get that. They're the ones, by the way, who do that imaging that they discover paintings laying under other paintings. Super cool. More generally, how you can actually find out more about digital humanities is that I always recommend you look at, the DLOC has a library guide to digital humanities that comes with it that's specific to the Caribbean, but you can also actually just Google Digital Humanities LibGuides, LIBGUIDES, and all of the digital humanities librarians in the United States are required to produce one of those by their institution, and they come with definitions and links to tools and all of that that you can sort of follow and parse for your own needs and interests. Yeah.
Si el interés que tienes, dime tu nombre. Aisha, si el interés que tienes está también relacionado con exponerte a experiencias de internado con gente que esté trabajando en humanidades digitales, también nosotras podemos colaborar y contactarte con Lori Taylor, que es la persona que corre DLOC en Florida, con Jennifer, con otra gente también. O sea, eso es parte del ejercicio de la colaboración.
Y también aprovechando, ¿verdad?, esa línea que da Mirza, this is what we're going to talk about what we can do for you, what we have learned so far after working 6 years with Jennifer and Lori. Nosotros tenemos una oficina que está ubicada en el edificio ERA. Esa oficina tiene algún equipo especializado, tenemos scanners, ¿verdad?, de alta resolución que son capaces de digitalizar a gran escala documentos tan grandes como un periódico abierto en sus 2 páginas. Tenemos los protocolos para poder crear los metadatos que son los identificadores de esos artículos, de esos materiales. Tenemos una guía ya PDF desarrollada por un colega de nuestro recinto, el doctor Joel Blanco, que ahora está radicado en México, y esa guía se puede enviar en formato PDF a través de correo electrónico para darle a ustedes unos estándares de cómo crear esos metadatos. Además de eso, hemos creado unos protocolos para hacer la entrega a DLOC, utilizando herramientas bien básicas como un Google Drive, donde almacenamos los documentos después de digitalizados, y una tablita Excel con los metadatos, y todo eso lo enviamos a través del internet, dándole acceso a la gente de DLOC a través del Google Drive. DLOC jura que se tarda, pero realmente se tarda una semana, que para nosotros es nada. DLOC también, en el caso nuestro, ha podido abrir dentro de su portal una colección para nuestro proyecto. Así que las personas que están buscando un ítem, digamos, relacionado con Vieques, puede acceder a ese ítem a través de la página general de DLOC o a través de nuestra página en DLOC, que está bajo el proyecto Caribbean Diaspora. Así que eso lo podemos hacer, ¿verdad?, a pequeña escala, con proyectos de nuestros estudiantes y de nuestros colegas. No tenemos la capacidad de dar la asistencia técnica, ¿verdad?, de tener un estudiante que haga eso por ustedes, pero sí ya tenemos algunas herramientas que podemos compartir para que usted pueda individualmente realizar ese trabajo.
I'll also mention there's a Canadian project that provides an index to digital humanities tools. This is Tapor, TAPOR.ca. And as you can see, they have over almost 1,500 tools indexed. And you can click the right side, and they're categorized. So like, I want to map, I want to analyze, I want to visualize. And when you click that, it opens the list, and there are peer reviews and ratings to tell you how good things are and how bad things are. So that's a great use of a tool set, yeah.
So I was wondering about the usage rights
Yeah.
Of the document. It's just that I know that there's some private projects that are giving that access the public resources and
Yep.
they digitize it, but there are no usage rights to saying that, okay, so since you're a private company, you're making
Yeah.
money for it, some of that money has to come back. Are there like any resources of example of usage rights where the institution can benefit from any private organization that uses those resources to make money?
Yeah, so most institutions have it's copyright, and I can never remember the scientific word for it as well. Most institutions have a rule that anything you create when you work for an institution, they have the right to earn money from, and they can enforce that. In the digital humanities, though, one of the things you'll notice when you go to apply for funding, funders have a very strong preference for what's called open access tools and data. And open access is a principle that says everything should be freely available online to use for anyone who wants to. What we do, or the recommendation that I give to people, is that they copyright their product as using a Creative Commons license. So as you scroll down to the bottom here, you'll see, here you go. There's a support statement for that. But when you click the About Tapor, what you get is a Creative Commons license. Creative Commons is a global licensing thing where you say, I want to be able to have people use this, but I don't want them to be able to make money from it. So that's a share-alike non-commercial license, SANC license. Those things are the best things to use on your projects because it means no one can lift your project up and then go sell it out from underneath you. Yeah.
Déjame, si me permite
Yeah.
2 segundos, la Biblioteca General y Sánchez, yo creo que estaba por ahí, lo vi ahorita, y Noraida, no sé si tuvieron que salir, pero la Biblioteca General trabaja unos proyectos de biblioteca digital y de repositorio de revistas digitales que entiendo trabaja con Creative Commons, con esa licencia. Así que si tienes más preguntas o te interesa explorar como esa área, la las herramientas están disponibles y la gente que las maneja también, o sea, a nivel de recinto.
Yeah.
Is Creative Commons license available for dual license? Can you publish under Creative Commons and also under another license that would help the institution be sustainable?
You can, as long as they're not in conflict with each other. So projects that are global oftentimes will have a Creative Commons license and an EU license, or a Creative Commons license and a copyright license. The only way someone cares is if the license conflict with one another. So I've chosen non-commercial for the Creative Commons, but then in the license for my university, I've said anybody can make money from it. As long as your licenses go together, everybody's cool, and you can list all of them as often as you'd like. And there's also the similar thing for software. So there's a similar licensing system for software, and you can Creative Commons license your digital project and have a separate license just to govern the software piece of the project. And that's totally legitimate, is to divide your project out in those components and create licenses for each of the components. Yeah. Yeah.
Jennifer, I would like you to elaborate more on the idea of collaboration.
Yeah.
Because as a researcher, it took me a while to understand. Of course, it was clear to me at first that people like you, people like Lori, they can help us. But I don't know how we can help you guys. So
Yeah.
perhaps if you can elaborate on what we can offer to you.
Yeah.
As an institution, as a research group.
So collaboration is scary, right? The first time you try to collaborate with someone, you learn a lot about yourself. I'm a very logical, orderly person. I'm a chart person, right? I'm an Excel person. I'm a person who likes things in boxes and grids and whatever. And I happen to collaborate with a lot of people who like to draw pictures or like to have non-structured things in their life. And it drives me nuts as a collaborator because I want order and things. When we talk about collaboration, the thing that I remind people about collaboration is the best collaborations are when you find people who can complement you and challenge you. So whether it's they have other technical skills and their knowledge challenges your own, or it can be they're in a different humanities discipline and the way they ask questions is different. Like, I'm a cultural historian. I ask questions very, very differently than a literature professor. And so a lot of times when I talk about collaborations, what I say to people is, you identify what you need to do in your project, what you need to know how to do, and then you find people around you who are nice human beings that you want to work with, and those are the people that you collaborate with. In terms of reversing the collaboration stream, I mean, the reason why I collaborate with you guys is that it's tremendously rewarding for someone like me who's been in the field since I started in 1999 in digital archives, and then became a digital humanist in the late 90s, early 2000s, and now I'm a tenured professor of whatever. It's easy to become jaded when you've been in the field for a while, and it's easy to become cynical about how things work and operate, and the systems of privilege that we operate in an institution. Like, Indiana is a big institution and has lots and lots of money. I don't get very much of it because I'm a humanist, but they have lots of money and resources and support. And it's incredibly rewarding to be able to come down here and watch you guys work through the process for yourself and come up with answers that matter to you and your community. And I think that's where the collaboration is great as a reversal. Like, to watch you guys talk about and think about decolonization in the face of environmental and social justice movements, that helps my work. That helps the way I think and teach and train. And I think that's where the best collaborations are, is when both parties are getting something out of it and it's not extractive, it's not mean-spirited, it's not about who gets credit for whatever, it's about exchanging ideas and support. And I will tell you that every project I take on is different. I just finished a collaborative article with a colleague who's an anthropologist that we're writing for a journal that a third colleague is special editing. And it was the most hard, difficult collaboration, I think, in my life. But it's because the ideas were difficult and hard, and it took us multiple iterations to get through them. And I think that's the thing, is any collaboration, you want to enjoy the people you're around, you want to value what you're working towards, and you want to celebrate the small successes. And that's why it's great for me to come back 6 years after the first time I came. Like, you guys have made incredible strides, and those 6 years have been traumatic in ways no one else is going to understand. And so the fact that 40 of you showed up to listen to me talk, I get joy out of that. It's nice. Makes me feel good. Especially because, like, in my university, I ain't getting 40 people to do anything. Unless I'm giving them beer, it's not going to happen.
I have a question related to opportunities with organizations like the ones you are related to on the area of digital humanities. I would like to know if there are special workshops,
Yeah.
summer programs, some fellowships available, you know, for librarians, archivists, students in the area of library studies,
Yeah.
you know, that could provide the space, the expertise, and funding.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, in June, the first ever U.S. Latinx digital humanities class is being offered at I run a training institute, and some colleagues from the University of Houston who run the Recovering the U.S. Hispanic Heritage Project are going to be running a class. I'm pretty sure they're going to teach it mostly in Spanish. I didn't ask, but I assume so. And it is specifically on Hispanic society, Global South, the Caribbean, and all of those things. So we offer scholarships. It's not very expensive comparatively. More importantly, though, if you look outside of that training institute, almost every single person who gets a training grant has the money from the funder to pay for you to attend. So the National Endowment for the Humanities offers these, the Digital Library Federations offers these, the Association for Computers and the Humanities, the Digital Humanities Association, all of those offer bursaries to people to pay their travel and housing and registration costs to come to take workshops and to come to take trainings. I happen to be the program chair for Digital Humanities 2020, which is in Ottawa next year, and we have money for Indigenous scholars, we have money for early career scholars, graduate students, under-resourced scholars, to come to Canada to present and be part of workshops and to learn, because we want you there, like your voices matter. So a lot of times it's just sort of like asking around and asking people where they got their training. Like if Alex was up here, Alex Gill was up here, he would tell you like UVA has a fellows program that's super awesome. You can go there and spend a week, you can spend 6 months, you could spend a year learning from the folks at UVA. So most of the big digital humanities centers have sort of a fellowship program. I would encourage you to look at those, and I would particularly encourage you to look at those when they're tied to Hispanic-speaking, Spanish-speaking projects. Yeah. 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 So there are a number of technical challenges. So if you're starting from knowing anything, which is how I started, one of the first technical challenges is understanding how a computer and the internet operates. Like how many of you guys have used the command line? Right? A couple, right? A lot of tools require using command line. So it depends on the tool you're trying to use, what the technical barriers are to be proficient. What I will say to you is, if you understand how a command line operates, if you understand HTML5, which is the standard for HTML now, and CSS, and either JavaScript or Bootstrap, which is another technology, you could get a job in digital humanities tomorrow, building DH projects. Where the technical challenges get more difficult are when you want to move to that end of the spectrum that's about building your own code. So I have a large number of colleagues who are digital humanities developers. When you get to that end of the spectrum, you tend to specialize in a very particular type of technology. So I have a colleague who specializes in textual scholarship, and they build technology stacks for digital editions. That requires a different set of technical skills than my colleagues who are at California in the mapping center who are building stacks for technical skills for mapping. So to some extent, when I answer the technical question for people, what I usually say to them is, do you like pictures? Do you like maps? Do you like words? Because then once you've decided that, I can tell you what are the technical skills you need to be proficient in that. But
Una de las cosas que hemos aprendido en el proceso de solicitar fondos para el proyecto nuestro es que hay dinero disponible para estudiantes y personal, people who are interested in developing those new technologies. hay dinero disponible para financiar esos proyectos también.
And a great thing to look at. So a group of colleagues run a special journal that is dedicated to the Caribbean and digital humanities in the Caribbean. It's called Small Acts, Archipelagos. And they specifically publish issues where they have articles, but they also publish digital projects and reviews of digital projects. And that's a great way to learn what the technologies are that people are using that you might yourself want to use. So I think this ecclesiastical one is using a text encoding platform and Oxygen and some other things. But you can sort of go through this journal and they will tell you what the technical things are, and they're sort of peer reviews of the projects. And the articles are also super, super awesome. Yeah, Archipelagos. Yeah.
So have you had experiences working across the island with digital sciences? Do you know successful projects on that?
I have not had experience across the island working in digital sciences, but this would be a question for you guys. Have you guys talked to your science colleagues? I mean, I know you talked to your computer science colleagues, but...
Well, let's see. Professor Carlos Corrada is the person that we are referring. Perhaps, Carlos, tú puedes hablar un poco del Departamento de Ciencias de Cómputo y hablar de los ofrecimientos en términos de cursos y las proyecciones de servicios que tiene el departamento para un futuro bien cercano.
Seguro que hice mi asignación antes de venir. En español o en inglés.
Como quiera.
El Departamento de Ciencia de Cómputo, Alejandro, parte de él. Tenemos un bachillerato en este momento, tenemos clases de introducción a ciencia de cómputo, a la programación, tenemos cursos de desarrollo de software, desarrollo de aplicaciones web. Tú estás presidiendo, ¿verdad? La Asociación de Estudiantes de Ciencia de Cómputo, ofrecen talleres de Command Line, de Linux, de Python, etc. Estamos en proceso de desarrollar un programa graduado que ahora mismo está en el Senado académico sentado. Sí, no sentado, no, bien sentado, pero está moviendo, llegó hace poquito, no quiero decir que está estancado allí, seguramente se estanque en otro lado. Pero bueno, somos un departamento que empezamos en el 2004, así que llevamos poco tiempo, pero estamos trabajando sobre todo asociados con mucha gente diversa, ahora con humanidades, pero llevamos tiempo trabajando con gente en biología, en física, en química, en otras áreas, o sea que parte de nuestra naturaleza es buscar aplicaciones y no solamente en ciencia de cómputo.
También como parte de nuestro proceso de aprendizaje en la creación de proyectos en humanidades digitales, nos dimos cuenta que ante la incertidumbre de no saber si vamos a tener fondos recurrentes para poder mantener nuestros proyectos y subcontratar a un programador, lo mejor es ir armando un andamiaje tecnológico, un andamiaje humanístico, un andamiaje de programación para poder hacer todo in-house, poder hacer el proyecto desde conceptualizarlo hasta finalmente tenerlo en el internet en nuestro recinto.
Y en esa dirección, el departamento estamos empezando tratando de desarrollar lo que llamamos el Centro de Desarrollo y Consultoría Computacional, y que ahora mismo estamos dando servicio a la universidad, ¿verdad? El departamento poniendo tiempo nuestro de los profesores, pero pues recibiendo de los proyectistas dinero para estudiantes, etc. Y ahí ahora mismo tenemos 5 proyectos que estamos trabajando, y la idea es pues que podamos también buscar dinero afuera que nos ayude a sostener la infraestructura, ¿no? O sea,
así que esas colaboraciones son, ¿verdad? Nosotros estamos haciendo un proyecto piloto bien pequeñito, pero lo que estamos probando precisamente son las posibilidades y los límites de esa colaboración con miras a
desarrollar un centro de humanidades digitales en el recinto, ¿verdad? Ese es mi sueño. Estamos también colaborando con los bibliotecarios, no solamente de este recinto, en el caso de Julio con la colección El Mundo, pero también con Hilda Teresa en el recinto universitario de Mayagüez. Así que un poco lo que el proyecto nos ha permitido es crear una estructura de personal que hasta el momento, ¿verdad?, es como una especie de incubadora móvil, porque bueno, no tenemos la infraestructura, no tenemos un espacio, aunque hay una promesa de que vamos a estar en la biblioteca Ángel Quintero Alfaro cuando eso ocurra. Así que una vez tengamos, ¿verdad?, nuestra sede, el espacio es bien importante porque ahí es donde vamos a poder recibir a esos proyectistas y es donde vamos a poder poner a disposición de esos proyectos las redes que estamos construyendo poco a poco. Así que la idea a largo plazo, ¿verdad?, es poder desarrollar un centro de humanidades digitales que resida aquí en general, bien cerca de ciencias de cómputo, en nuestra biblioteca, siempre en colaboración con las demás facultades.
Y de nuevo aprovecho porque veo que hay varias caras por aquí de la maestría. Humanidades también tiene un programa de maestría en gestión cultural para estudiantes de bachillerato que no conozcan del proyecto. Y nosotros trabajamos con humanidades digitales también, en intersecciones de teoría y práctica, damos cursos de archivos digitales para gestión cultural, etc. Por ahí como 4 o 5 caras y unos cuantos egresados. Hacemos cruces entre humanidades, la escuela de bibliotecología, sociología, arquitectura, leyes, así que el grupo es bien diverso y la idea es también crear un semillero de proyectos posibles que terminan siendo proyectos de maestría y algunos de ellos terminan siendo proyectos, los proyectos de maestría que no se quedan para el recinto sino de impacto a un público más amplio, justamente de humanidades digitales. Así que si también interesan en humanidades, estamos haciendo proyectos al respecto.
One of the things that may be useful to say too, unlike a lot of academic fields, the digital humanities failure is not something that's negative. Not knowing how to do something is not a problem in the digital humanities. We fail constantly, and spectacularly in some cases. Trust me. So when you think about collaborations and you think about the digital humanities and you think about these types of partnerships, one of the things I like to say to people is, you don't know until you try it yourself. And until you try it yourself and have someone teach you, you don't know if you're trying the right way. And then if you've tried, after someone's taught you and you still can't do it, that's when you hire and partner with someone. And that's legitimate. That's totally legitimate. I think what we want as scholars is to see, like, I code, but when you put me in a room full of developers, my threshold of knowledge is so small compared to theirs, right? What you just want to be able to do as a digital humanist is be in the conversation and try and ask questions. So it doesn't really matter if you fail or if you have to get help. That's okay. And I think that's where digital humanities is a bit different than other disciplines where if your article is bad, you have to live with it forever. In the digital humanities, if your project is bad or it doesn't work, you just try again.
Rapidito, una oportunidad que si tienen un proyecto de escala menor, creo que es apropiado para el curso de software engineering de la carrera. Los estudiantes hacen un proyecto por el semestre y pues que sí, como parte de la asociación de estudiantes de ciencia de cómputo tenemos un taller del Unity Game Engine para el 2024, mayormente para hacer juegos, pero sé que he visto que la gente lo ha usado para programar experiencia interactiva. Para todas las plataformas web, el móvil, el sistema operativo de computador.
Y que se considera gestión cultural porque es un producto cultural, así que es perfectamente válido y está en todo esto.
Pues sí, pueden chequearlo en Facebook para esa actividad, sí.
Marta, esa información la circulamos.
This may be a complicated question, but given your experience in the different institutions in the United States, in order to develop because I guess the main problem with collaboration is that academics almost by nature tend to not collaborate and more on things. So that that presents us several challenges, but if we were in a dream scenario, if we were to develop sort of a digital humanities or social sciences or expanded digital scholarship in the university, which would be the best strategy in terms of whether it's the center or whether it's a cluster hire on the area? Because I guess the risk might be that then people that have the experience and the knowledge then get to be the people that we go to, particularly those of us that will be in one extreme of the continuum. So you would have, let's say, if we hire, again, dream scenario, we hire a couple of assistant professors on digital humanities that would be in competition for their own tenure and thing, but then they get bombarded by other scholars. So what would be a strategy of doing a cluster hire or developing a center that sort of trains everyone to engage with it?
So it actually has a relatively simple answer, which is, I think the first thing you need is a room with something on the door that says digital humanities, that people can meet in and talk to each other. It doesn't have to be anything in the room other than some chairs and some seats, but it needs to be someplace every week that people can come and talk to each other about what they're trying to do. That's the first step. The second step is to convince the people that are already on your campus, whose job it is to do librarianship or technology or humanities, that are interested in the digital humanities, to have what's called a workload reassignment. And a workload reassignment document basically says, we're going to let you spend X hours per week pursuing this digital humanities thing for a period of 6 months or a year. And then at the end of that time, we want you to tell us what you got out of it and whether it's worthwhile for you to continue. Those two steps don't require any new money, don't require anything other than a space and a boss who is amenable, or a tenure group or a dean or a chair who's amenable to that. Where you get into trouble, and this is, I feel very strongly about this, I've been in 3 digital humanities centers, I have been a tenured digital humanist with digital humanities scholarship. Where you get into trouble is when people say, we're going to go do a cluster hire in digital humanities, and you bring in faculty, and there's no infrastructure for them to hang their work on, the tenure guidelines and promotion guidelines have not changed, and it's the same thing for digital librarians. So if you're a digital humanities librarian, and you're brought to a campus that's never done any digital humanities, and then you say to them, get tenured as a librarian, and like you don't even have a digital asset management system, that's really hard for them to do. So what I suggest to people is to say, can you start with the room and the workload reassignment for a year or so? See what you can come up with that everybody is comfortable collaborating with, what support, what resources, what students, what whatever. And then after that year is up, you're going to know where your gaps are that you need to fill. So maybe one of your gaps is hiring a digital humanities librarian. Maybe one of your gaps is hiring a digital scholarship person, because scholarship is about publishing. Digital humanities librarianship is about projects and project-based things. Or maybe you really have identified that you actually are ready for some faculty because you figured out the sort of infrastructure on the ground here well enough that somebody could come in and launch a project in a week or 2. So I tend to say to people, cluster hires are great because they have great impact, they're big things, but it's impossible if you are part of the cluster and your campus doesn't know what digital humanities is and there's no infrastructure. So I tend to say, what you want is something you call a center, that's some space and some workload reassignments and some money to like have some workshops and some trainings, and then that group sets its own goals as it moves forward. That way you get buy-in, but also it's reasonable. And I think that's one of the mistakes that a lot of universities make when they say they're going to launch a digital humanities center, is they expect that those people are going to get hired, they're going to come in, and within the first 3 months they're going to bring in millions of dollars and splashy project in the public that people are going to know and love and see. And what they forget is, it takes time to write grants and win money, it takes time to build a splashy project and have a community, and getting tenured while you're trying to do it is like an albatross around your neck, which is why most of the centers that have done that have not fared as well as centers that have been more conservative and community-driven in their origins. I mean, one simple conversation to have would be with your campus about like, can the library have a digital humanities scholarship librarian? Like, could you have a person who like?
Well, we don't even have subject librarians.
Exactly.
So that's a challenge.
Right, but I think those are the
I mean, we have them
conversations.
in practice because we know some of them have particularly difficult, but they don't have the position or the standing as a subject librarian.
And I think that's the conversation you have to have. Why could, or one of the things to say is, part of what is the benefit of a digital humanities librarian is they cut across all the subjects, right? They have knowledge about how all these things operate, so they can lift everybody, right? But I think you have to have those conversations, because otherwise what happens is you end up with pockets of people in lots of schools and departments that can never talk to each other because no one at the upper administration has agreed that this is a priority. So one of the steps I always advise when centers come to me for advice about their growth pattern, I always say, can you get this listed somewhere in like the dean's report annually that this is a priority, or the chair's report, or the chancellor's report, or the president's report? If they use those words, a lot of times then you get resources and support you wouldn't otherwise.
I will second that, and we are from Mayagüez, but we know that Grupo Rio Piedras is in the same situation. We've been in higher freeze for several years, and libraries have lost their positions in our case, we lost 42% of our librarians' positions, faculty positions in the last 6 years, and we have not been able to hire in a permanent basis anybody. The same situation is in all the libraries, is in all the UPR campuses. So what you just say about putting as a priority that you need this specialized staff to be hired in your library at the dean's level or chancellor's level, that would be amazing, because then the library's director will have that as a argument when they go to the president. They have gone through all the presidents that we had in the last so many years with this request, and all the requests have been delegated. So we are lucky in our campus because we were able to hire Ila Teresa as a special appointment, but still, it's not a permanent position. And Rio Piedras is in the same situation, and all the campuses are in the same situation. So what you just say about making this a priority within the departments, within the deanships, it will help the libraries have that. And the other part of this is have that word heard at the library school. They need to have courses specialized to be able to hire. We hired Teresa with experience from Canada. So I'm coming from Wisconsin. She's coming also from Wisconsin. So from the other Wisconsin state. So in order to have staff that is trained to do this kind of work, you need to have an education that maybe is not happening right now, and you need the library school to move really away from traditional librarianship to these new areas of librarianship. In my case, I'm working with youth research, which is a totally different area. So to get that knowledge, you have to educate yourself, because here there is nothing.
And there's a model of this in the digital humanities for campus sharing. I have a colleague, Tassie Janady, who is at IU Bloomington, which is about an hour south of my campus. Her official job description is to serve the digital humanists at all 9 campuses in the state. So people can write to her from any of the campuses, and she will help them with their digital humanities work. And that's something to consider, right? Because when you go to your dean and you say, I need $40,000 for a person, most deans are going to laugh at you. But when you go to your dean and you say, I need $4,000 or $5,000, and we're going to have this person serve 6 campuses or 8 campuses, that makes it a lot more amenable, because then it's not a huge chunk of money, and as long as you're able to show the value, that matters. And there's a lot of campuses that have this. The Cal system has this as well, where you can share staff among different departments and different schools and different campuses as needed.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias a todos por asistir. Vamos a tratar de convalidar estas horas de conferencia como hora de entrenamiento, así que si están interesados en hacer eso, asegúrense que su correo electrónico está registrado en la lista de asistencia. Hagamos mucho ruido digital para que este centro finalmente tenga un espacio y sea una realidad. El futuro de todos nuestros documentos documentos de todos nuestros archivos es digital. Así que vamos a seguir perseverando en crear en esos espacios de diálogo y de encuentro para desarrollar futuras colaboraciones. Gracias a todos por venir.
And I'll give Nadia a copy of the presentation, or you can come get it from my thumb drive if you want it right now. Either way, you're welcome to it, and I can help you with links. And I'm on Twitter, so I'm easy to find if you have questions.
Thank you.